Welcome to In the News for August 27th, 2021. I am Brett Burney from appsandlaw.com.
Hey, Brett, this is Jeff Richardson from iPhone JD.
Jeff, it has been a little bit of a momentous date this past week. It was August 24th or 25th? 24th, right?
The 24th, yes.
Yeah. It was 10 years ago today. You actually wrote, well, August 25th, 10 years ago, you wrote this post on iPhone JD. It was the letter from Steve Jobs to the Apple board of directors, which was a very short letter. And he wanted to stay involved in Apple, but everybody knew at that point, he'd already made some announcements and some public appearances that it was fairly obvious that his health was failing at that point. Mm-hmm. And you had this post of that letter, but this past week, since it's been 10 years, there were several stories that you linked to where we were remembering that day, but then also celebrating the fact that Tim Cook has now been the CEO of Apple for the past 10 years. A little bit of a momentous date for sure.
Yeah, so it's sort of bittersweet. You know, on the one hand, remembering I remember it like it was yesterday, Brett, that, although we all knew that Steve Jobs was having health problems, you could see it when you saw him on stage and stuff like that. Yeah. And, but part of you just wants to believe that people like that will be around forever. And so when he sent that letter, it was a very well written letter. It was very bittersweet and,
very short,
and frankly, it was only a couple of months before he passed away. So that must've been really close to the end when he did that.
Right.
But the thing is that he had clearly been grooming Tim Cook to take over the job for a while, which was fascinating to me at the time because Tim Cook was almost like the opposite of Steve Jobs, right? Steve Jobs is the showman, he's marketing, he's ideas, he's crazy and everything else. Whereas Tim Cook is, steady, calm, meticulous, just, detail oriented. And so at the time, a lot of people were saying like, is this going to work? I mean, is Apple going to go down the tubes? And of course, just the opposite have happened because Apple is now, no matter what metric you want to use, stock price, revenue, products, I mean, any way that you count it, Apple under Tim Cook has done incredibly well.
Right. Just to underscore that, there's several stories because I want to go back to this one that you linked to, but this is from The Verge, and they says a decade later, what has Tim Cook built? And their sentence here, Apple is bigger than oil. Bigger than oil. That tells you everything.
But and just above it too, the most valuable and profitable company in the world. I mean, that pretty much tells you. But of course, I could care less how much money Apple makes. I mean, Apple could just be squeaking by as long as they were making products that I loved. And the good news is they're still making great products that I love, and they've got some new things coming out. Apple Watch being a good example of that, something that's come out under Tim Cook's stewardship.
Right. Well, I want to go back to this story quickly that you linked to from 9 to 5 Mac, just because I don't know if I should be embarrassed to admit this, but as I was reading through some of this and these remembrances here, Jeff, I almost teared up a little bit because they were going through all of this fact of the reactions from the community. And in fact, they talk about John Gruber here, where he says, everybody, we knew, or here it is. He said, this is not something out of nowhere. It's not even unexpected. We could all see this was coming. The fact that Steve Jobs was, gonna leave or was actually gonna pass away, but it is still a shock on this. And one of the things down
that
here,
sentence too. It's funny that you highlighted it because that was one of the sentences in this article that jumped out at me too, because that summed it up perfectly. We all knew it was coming, but that didn't change the fact that when it actually happened, just the idea that Steve Jobs was stepping down from Apple. I mean, Steve Jobs was Apple. It was just a shock. It really was.
Right. And so this article has a little embedded video here from CNN because it broke into news. I mean, it was that big of a deal. Definitely. But I got to tell you one thing quickly here. This was one of the things that I remember. Do you remember this? This was the city council meeting.
Just looking at the picture, I know exactly what it was. It's the last public appearance that Steve Jobs did. He was appearing at the Cupertino City Council to get waivers so that they could build what people refer to as the spaceship campus,
the spaceship,
Apple Park. And you could tell that he was, definitely not, more of the frail Steve Jobs. Right, what's the date on this? Does it say what date this was?
It did. It was June 7th, 2011, I believe. Yep, June 7th.
All I remember is that it was the last public appearance that we saw of him. And, that campus was definitely his baby.
Well, I think I remember watching this. I remember, and I just remember watching this little video and thinking, first of all, Steve looks terrible, and I mean that in the sense that his health obviously was failing him tremendously at this point. But it struck me that he's at a city council meeting. You know, he's used to being in front of thousands and thousands of people and talking to them. And this is the city council here. And he's like laying out his plans as if he was like some kind of a humble, you know, a shoemaker or something, you know, for the city coming before them. And he did it in all humbleness, to be honest with you. And it just was, I don't know, it was just amazing to me. He's going in and trying to tell them how, you know, how this new campus from Apple is going to benefit the city. And it almost be like sitting there like, who would even doubt that? But he did it in all the humbleness. And, you know, it was just so poignant that this was his last public appearance on this. So
I agree.
Good. When you blinked to this story, that was the thing that just jumped right out to me, because I was just, that's amazing. And then this last one here quickly, this was, when was this show here?
So
I think
what they're talking about
October
is
2011. Yeah.
This was the debut of the iPhone 4S. And I say that because people would say at the time that 4S made them think of For Steve, because it was debuted.
Yeah.
I want to say just a few, I'd have to look at a calendar, but I want to say it was very, very shortly before or after he passed away. It was right around that time. It must have been just before, because I see here it says reserved, and this was on October 4th.
Yeah.
The date that he passed was pretty close to that. So
I think it was the day after. In fact, it says it right here. So this was October 4th, 2011. And they had a seat here because there was some speculation that maybe Steve would join, because I think Tim Cook was on the stage here. And these are all the other Apple executives sitting here in the front row. And it was the day after that Steve passed away. So
that's right.
Anyway,
it was October 5th,
I didn't want to spend too much time on that, but I'm so glad you linked to the story. This author here at 9 to 5, who is this? Parker Ortolani, did an excellent job. Even he was saying he had posters of Steve on his room. He was in like middle school or something, and Steve Jobs was still his hero even at that time. And so it was just a well written article here, and a little poignant on bringing up, you know, how people remembered him on that.
Yeah, you know, we could talk about Steve Jobs forever, but one thing that I saw, I can't even remember if it was recently or if it was as I was looking at stuff from 10 years ago. But Harry McCracken, who's a tech pundit, he used to run PC World, but he made I think he was the one, if I remember correctly, that he made a comment that, you know, Steve Jobs is one of those rare people that he completely revolutionized the computer industry and in some ways, you know, the world, by introducing the Apple II and the Apple in the late 70s. And then, of course, the Mac, you know, completely changed computers with graphic interfaces. And then, you know, years and years and years later with the iPhone, and to a lesser degree, the iPad. I mean, to have one person that has been involved in so many you know, incredible decisions, whether it's the world of technology or you pick it, you know, any other field as well, it's impressive. And again, nobody needs me to say that Steve Jobs was an impressive person, even though at the same time I know he drove some people crazy too. But they were, suffice it to say, it was big shoes to fill. So that probably is a good transition into your going to the next tab here.
Absolutely. Well, I just had to show off my book.
I have that book too.
This was a present from when I was overseeing the ABA Tech Show. And I remember the gentleman that gave it to me, he said they said it was signed by Steve Jobs. It says, "Brett, thanks for pimping Apple at ABA Tech Show all these years, Steve Jobs." It was not Steve Jobs that signed it, but I just thought that was pretty funny that they.
That's the Walter Isaacson book that you're holding up. Right?
It is. It really is. But I love the picture on the back as well.
That's a great picture of him with the original Mac. Yeah, I actually have a signed version from Walter Isaacson himself, because Walter Isaacson.
Oh my goodness!
He's from New Orleans.
Actual sign.
So I saw him. He did a little presentation about it, and I got a signed copy from him. So.
Okay, so I know we've been talking about this already again, but now let's go to what it has looked like over the past 10 years under Tim Cook. We've already addressed some of this. You know, it's just amazing. Like you said, the Apple Watch, you know, coming out. I mean, just here's the thing that got me on this. As of June 2021, Apple now makes an average of $10,000 every second.
Wow.
$3,600 of which is pure profit. Now, this is on The Verge. You didn't link to this one, I know, but I found it just because I was reading so much more about Tim Cook. So that's just amazing. Like you said, we don't care about the money so much because you and I so much more care about like the functionality and the devices and everything. But that's still just mind blowing numbers there. But then if we start talking about all the things that has come out and all the things that have improved over this last 10 years, I think it could have been several years ago. No one would dispute Tim Cook's amazing capability to run Apple. That's for sure.
Yeah. And, one way that the numbers do matter, Brett, is that, for many, I was using a Mac when I was in college in the late 80s
Right.
and into the 90s. And in fact, even my law firm was using Macs in the mid 90s when I started. We did so for many years. But when you were using a product that had such a small portion of the market, there were problems, right? Because like for me as a lawyer, there was legal specific software that came out in the early 2000s, which didn't work on the Mac, and the internet was still new then. So we didn't really have the web stuff like we do now. And so there are some problems that come with using a product that only has a very small portion of the market. And so fast forward to today, the iPhone has all of the Apple goodness that the Mac did way back when and everything else. But because it is such a mainstream product that so many people use, you no longer, imagine if the iPhone had like a 3% market share, you would have companies saying, oh, we're not going to make our company work with the iPhone. But because its share is so big, then people bend over backwards to make their stuff work with the iPhone. And then the iPhone becomes more viable, and then the iPad becomes more viable. So from that standpoint, because I enjoy using Apple products, I am thrilled that the company has been so financially successful, because that means a lot of people using it. Apple has the money to not have to worry about going bankrupt. They can acquire other companies. They can acquire talent. So it does matter in a way.
Absolutely. And, I was just making a short list to myself of all the things like on the hardware side, because we can talk about hardware, we can talk about services, we can talk about software even at Apple these days. We have the iPhone, the iPad, of course, all of the Macs and all of their various integrations, the Apple TV, the Apple Watch. We have AirPods now in different forms and fashions, the AirTags, the HomePod. Now, this story, I think on The Verge, talks about the fact that everything hasn't always been roses, right? There were Apple had promised they were going to do an AirPower, charging pad. And then of course, there's been some mistakes. Yeah, exactly. There's been some issues. Maybe I shouldn't call it mistakes, but some issues like with the keyboard. I had one of those Macs that had that keyboard, and it was mind numbing. I hated it anyway, but there have been some, like anything, nobody's perfect. But not only that, but also with the services, that everything is going around. And I don't know. I think about it. It really, Tim Cook is really amazing. You had another link to another story where, he gets up, he starts his day at 4 a.m. because, he has time that he can manage himself. Yeah. But it's just like, it really has taken somebody like Tim Cook, who is an unusual individual himself. But, under this, it's not even this. We can talk about the politicism, that he's been involved in, and he's guided the company through that. But, just in the fact that they are now at that spaceship campus, as it were, and, a lot of scrutiny that, of course, Apple has come under. And it just seems like Tim Cook is able to keep a cool head and lead the company. And it's been amazing. I'm excited to see how much longer, he's even admitted he's not going to stay at the company for that much, for another 10 years or so. Who knows how long it's going to be, but it's just amazing that he's done what he's able to do. And who knows where that's going to go.
As great as Steve Jobs was for the company, for everything that he did, I really do feel like, and again, the last 10 years shows it, that Tim Cook has been perfect for Apple as technology has become more important and cybersecurity issues and everything else, whether it was, years ago when he was being very level-headed as he was meeting with President Trump, even as President Trump would sometimes say things in front of them that were just wrong, but he just stayed the course. He knew that he had to play the game. And, this week he was just a couple of days ago, he was in DC meeting with President Biden and talking about cybersecurity. He can be involved in an appropriate way while being very focused, level-headed. I really get the sense that, no, Tim Cook is not the one that in the shower one morning is going to probably come up with the next great technology idea, whereas Steve Jobs always made you think that would have been him. But Apple has got a lot of those people. They need somebody to run this huge organization well, and it just really seems like he's doing a good job of it. Plus, one thing we never saw under Steve Jobs was things like, diversity initiatives and putting money towards donations and stuff like that. I mean, they say that Tim Cook has just given a huge amount of Apple stock anonymously to organizations around the world. And of course, when he came out as being gay, it was a big thing that, suddenly the biggest company in the world, a lot of people were thinking, that I could do that one day. It doesn't matter what my sexual orientation is. There's so many things that he's done that it's just a great person for. So it makes me happier to use Apple technology, knowing that he's the one at the helm. And so much like Steve Jobs had those big shoes to fill, as you said, Brett, within the next decade, we're going to have to find somebody else to fill Tim Cook's big shoes. And I don't know who that's going to be. I presume it's somebody that's working at the company now, but that's going to be a tough one. That's going to be a tough one.
Well, thanks for linking to those, because it was it was a poignant trip down memory lane. I keep using that word just because, we remember it. I mean, it's real to us, in a different way, I think, just because it's something that you and I know use every day with these Apple products and stuff. But you had another link to another story here to where we can just quickly cover this. Dan Morin, which we followed, for many, many years. He writes for Macworld and other places. But he had a neat little interesting column on here on Macworld, how Apple will eventually replace the iPhone. Like, what will those next 10 years be? Now, he focused on about three things, right? He focused on wearables, which is the Apple Watch more than anything else,
or AirPods too,
or AirPods exactly. And then he talked about voice interaction with Siri, and then he talked about Apple glasses, or the goggles, as he was talking about. So I don't know. What did you think about this story? It was really insightful, very short, but I just thought it was kind of neat to think about what's going to, we looked at the last 10 years, what will be happening in the next 10 years.
Yeah, it's interesting because it wasn't that long ago that I remember people were talking about how the iPod had saved Apple. And then, and now nobody has an iPod because the iPod has been replaced by the iPhone. So there will be a day where we will say, oh, the blank is what Apple's all about. And people are like, oh yeah, remember they used to have that iPhone back when? So that'll be interesting.
Right.
I mean, there's no question, anytime that you hear Tim Cook, speaking of Mr. Cook, anytime you hear him talk about what's coming in the future, and of course he doesn't pre-announce products, but he always talks about how augmented reality is something that Apple is really focused on. So having your objects understand the world around you, whether that's because you're wearing some sort of an Apple glasses that can literally see the world around you and understand it, or because through your iPhone or your watch or GPS or Wi-Fi or something like that, your Apple devices have an understanding of the world around you. And, I think we may have mentioned this before, but, I can always imagine a day when some device in my ear that's maybe even smaller than an AirPod, as I'm at some social function, will remind you, oh yeah, this person, that's John Doe. You know, your kids played soccer together way back when, those sorts of things, just to sort of help with your brain. So I do think that there's something there. So that's augmented reality type stuff is interesting. And frankly, the watch too, I just saw a rumor this week about the next version of the Apple Watch perhaps might be coming out in a few weeks. And, that's a device that when it first came out was slow and cumbersome and not great. And now is pretty good. And, in a couple more years into the future, it's going to be incredibly powerful. So I think that these are a couple good ideas of what might be the focus in the future.
Speaking of the watch quickly, my son actually sort of inherited my first generation Apple Watch.
Sure.
And he loves it. It's not a problem because it still works and it's amazing in and of itself. But just to your point, I have the 5th generation that I wear every day. And when I see the differences, it's again incredible to me how much we have progressed since then. And of course, I don't even have the 6th generation yet. And I saw some of the same stories you mentioned. It just, and the thing is, when I had that 5th generation now, when I switched to that, I started using the Apple Watch for even more and more things that just continues to blow me away. Like, I remember the Dick Tracy movies, and a lot of people, will refer to that, but it's really getting close to that. Even the walkie-talkie feature, the fact I can take a phone call from the Apple Watch. I mean, we're getting to the point where that could be one of the major things that replaces sort of the iPhone, in the slab of glass that we use. One thing you didn't mention,
before you jump on to that, because I know what you're going to say next, but on that Apple Watch point, just a little personal thing. My father had a birthday recently, and the thing that me and my siblings gave my father was something that he asked for, which was an Apple Watch. Now, Brett, you've never met my dad before, but he could not be any more non-technology. I mean, he is an architect who has not even making the jump. He's never made the jump to CAD, computer assisted drafting. So he draws everything by hand. He has as analog as they come. But he wanted an Apple Watch because he knew from seeing people around him that he could get notifications on it, and he could even use it as a phone if he didn't have his iPhone nearby. So when people like my father are interested in an Apple Watch, that just shows you that this is moving way beyond just the geek crowd that want to have the Dick Tracy watch, like what you mentioned, but into the mainstream. So, but you were about to say what's missing from this article.
Well, I was just going to say that, but quickly, it just made me think. I listen to Leo Laporte quite a bit, on Twit and their podcast. But he talks about he's got his mother, I think, is on the other side of the country, and he will make sure that she has an Apple Watch, for fall detection, just all the kind of stuff. I mean, it's just a pretty amazing. But the one thing that Dan didn't mention in here, and I think on purpose, but we don't know that Apple for sure maybe is working on goggles or Apple glasses, but I am sure that they are. But one thing we have sort of heard about is the Apple Car. Now, I don't know too much about it, and I guess I'm not that excited about, the self-driving car from Apple. But I'm seeing, the ones in Phoenix and different places that the Waymos and stuff. But I know when Apple does come out with it, it's going to be good, and I'm waiting for that day. But we'll see what happens. On that.
And maybe that's sort of connected to the augmented reality, because it's the idea that the car is seeing the world around you. But it is the biggest non-secret in the world, because everybody knows it's called Project Titan. Apple has to apply to the state of California to get permits to have driverless vehicles driving around. You don't get a permit for a driverless vehicle to drive around if you're working on the next iPhone. Clearly there's no joke they were looking. Now that doesn't mean that they will ever release something. Apple has looked at products in the past and then ultimately decided not to do it. But if when you and I are doing this podcast 10 years from now, if we still are, I suspect we'll be looking back at the last 10 years and saying, oh yeah, and then the Apple Car, that way, or whatever it's called, that was a big thing.
But I just quickly say, my family and I just came back from vacation, but I already consider our Honda Odyssey minivan an Apple Car, because every time I get in, the first thing I do is I plug in my iPhone, and that's what I use for everything. We used to have Sirius, through the car, but we even got rid of that, because now we just plug it in and I can use Apple Music or Spotify through that. I've got all my maps in there. We listen to the podcast through the car. Like everything that I need, I just go right directly to the phone. Anyway, it just makes, when I think about an Apple Car, one of the things was like, well, I already have access to all of the information that I'm comfortable with that I typically carry around with me, because I just plug it right into the car. But anyway, we'll see how Apple goes with that. So one other thing that you linked to, Jeff, that I know you've been a big fan of, how long ago did you review these? Oh, just about a year ago. This is mesh networking. This was a great article, first of all, from Tidbits that you linked to, where I just real quick before you get into it, I love this because it took me down memory lane just a little bit. We all know about wired Ethernet connections. And of course, we are familiar with Wi-Fi. But one thing in here that I don't hear anybody talking about anymore, I had some of these Powerline networking, that it was like Wi-Fi in your house through the actual electric ports in your house. Anyway, it's good that those are gone. They didn't work so well. But then today, and I'm sure everybody listening has at least heard about mesh Wi-Fi. You reviewed the eero Pro 3-pack about a year ago. Mm-hmm. And then this was just great that, anyway, let's talk about that just a little bit. I don't have mesh Wi-Fi, but I think I'm the only person that doesn't today. So a lot of people are jumping on this bandwagon.
The reason I linked to this today, it was a new article by Glenn Fleischman and Tidbits, but what I liked about it is Wi-Fi, or your home internet, is one of those things that for most people, you install something and then you just don't really touch it. And it stays there for years and years and years. And the next thing you know, it's been 5 years, maybe even 10 years since you changed anything. And the reality is that the world has, technology has improved since then. So back when I made the jump beforehand, I had, before about a year ago, I had been using an Apple device, called AirPorts, which Apple stopped making a very long time ago. And although they were getting minor updates, they weren't really being improved anymore. And I was having trouble getting the internet everywhere in my house. So, and this is of course something that we all became very aware of during the pandemic when we've been stuck at home a lot more than we used to be. But, you know, why having really good networking in your house, presumably through Wi-Fi, is, you know, it's valuable for a million reasons. It's valuable for getting work done. It's valuable for streaming television shows on, you know, on your Apple TV or other devices. It's valuable for having your iPhone in case the cell phone connections. I mean, I don't need to sell you on that, but what I would tell you,
it's a utility today.
It's very much a utility. And if you haven't updated your hardware in a while, I really encourage you to check out this article by Glenn Fleischman with the options.
Agreed.
Because he goes through all of them, and including, you know, you don't have to have the mesh. You can have the traditional type if it's one of the newer Wi-Fi devices that has a really, really good Wi-Fi station, like the one you're showing on screen right now from TP-Link with a secondary device. For some people, this might be exactly what you want. I personally love the mesh for the reasons that I talked about in that article last year, because mesh just does a great job of covering a huge area by having a couple devices. Unlike a normal router repeater that sort of you lose some of your speed every time you use one of those repeaters. But with mesh, they have their own back network to communicate with each other, and then there's the front Wi-Fi network. And I won't get into the technical explanation, but suffice it to say, it works. I mean, when you put a good mesh network, the one that I use is by the company called eero, E-E-R-O, you know, you will go from having dead spots in parts of your house to super fast Wi-Fi everywhere. So and you know, there's a little bit of an expense. I think I spent about $500. And frankly, if I was going to do it again today, not too long after I installed my Eero Pros, they came out with something called the Eero Pro 6, which is just a tiny bit better. And so since it's not something you're going to update every year, you might not update this every 5 years, 10 years, you might as well get, you know, a really good one. I think it's worth spending a little bit more for it. But for $600, you could get the 3 Eero Pro 6s, put them throughout, even if you have a very large house, or maybe if you have a smaller house, 2 Eero Pros is enough. But you know, they are fast. You get great Wi-Fi everywhere. The Pros are nice versus the regular Eeros because the Pros have Ethernet ports in the back of them, so you can even use it. Sometimes you'll have a device that has to be plugged in with the cord, and you can do that. And I'll say one more thing, which is, and Glenn mentions this too, you know, there is a place for wired, even in our wireless world. And my house is an example of that, because although I have 3 Eero Pros, I have 2 of them are actually connected to each other via an Ethernet wire that I had a year ago. Somebody actually install, actually it was more than a year ago. I had somebody literally install one that sort of runs outside my house to go from one room to the other. And so I have a perfect fast connection from the Eero in my study, which is where my cable modem is, to the Eero in my TV room. And then the third one just communicates via Wi-Fi. But by using that combination of wired and wireless, I have amazing internet everywhere. So it's, if you haven't made the jump, it's a really worthwhile looking at it. It really is.
I probably about a year ago myself, I did exactly what you talked about first. I simply just upgraded my main router, which is up here in my office, to one of these TP-Link. It's very similar to this one as well. And I saw, first of all, a pretty significant upgrade. I'm not saying that it was night and day difference, but it was a lot more reliable and it worked. And we, just because of the way that our house is set up, I just do have one extender downstairs. I really didn't even need it, but it does help to, increase the access to the Wi-Fi downstairs. And so again, just to underscore your point, that may be all you need. Like getting one of these more modern routers today and spending at least $100 or so is definitely going to pay off. I think people are going to be happy if you haven't already, because I know a lot of people have been doing this over the last year. But getting into the mesh networking component. In fact, I think I just, I usually just Google around. You can see these. The Eero routinely comes up as one of the best ones, just like what you were talking about there. The other thing you'll probably hear a lot about is the Google Nest Wi-Fi. Now, if you're a Google user or everybody's on Google, that's almost a no-brainer there to go into that. But I keep continuing to hear about the Eero Pro. Netgear also has Orbi, and I hear about that quite a bit. Yeah, you can see from
a performance standpoint, about that. Those all get great reviews. I will make one little plug in favor of Eero. The reason I went for it is Eero has a reputation of being the easiest to use, and networking can be so complicated. People often wonder why Apple didn't buy Eero. Frankly, I wish Apple had bought them instead of Amazon. But it has that mentality of, they will have a lot of power in there, but, and in fact, I'm going to talk about that at the end of the show, but it's super, super simple. I mean, the setup is easy. Everything is easy. You don't have to understand all this stuff.
Yeah.
It's basically plug and play. They walk you through it. And so that makes it approachable for anybody.
I like how you go into this in your review of talking about the app on there, like accessing it from the phone, which honestly I didn't do before anyway, but that's one thing. Even if you just get a regular router, I got the app on my iPhone as well. And it's so much better to be able to see, who's on, like how many connections are on. I mean, it's so today with a modern day router, even if you just upgrade to the router, don't even go mesh quite yet, you're probably going to have an app that can access your network. And that is a huge component on there. Because sometimes I give, like when my son's playing Xbox, I give the Xbox, priority over some of the other things, or I always give my phone priority over them watching YouTube or something like that. Like there's a lot of great settings that you can go in and you can test out on there. So anyway, I'm glad we talked about that. And I knew you become a fan of the mesh components on there, but thanks for linking to this story from Glenn Fleischman. That's a really good one there. Okay, so how about a couple of bonuses real quick? Here's something that I found. You didn't even link to this, I don't think, but I love this, and I'll tell you why. Every year that I remember, at least for the last couple of years, Apple celebrates the America's national parks. And this is all great. I love this as well. But one of the reasons that I go to, in fact, I think they do something on the Apple TV, so you can go in, they have an app that you can visit the parks. But the main reason that I get excited about it is because they come out with special badges
for your Apple
Watch. And I think this is tomorrow, right? August 28th.
Yeah, on Saturday.
Right. If you go, and I think you have to hike at a national park, or take a walk. You don't have to
go a mile. I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
You have to, whether it's on a treadmill or whether you're in the great outdoors, you have to go a mile. I think that's what they want to do.
I love these. Like I almost wish Apple would do more of these badges, but then I don't think that I would try as hard. Mm-hmm. Like I remember one year Thanksgiving, they had like a Thanksgiving challenge, and you had to run like 3 miles or something. And I did it. All my family was like, what in the world are you doing? Like, we're supposed to watch football, but I had to go out and get that silly little badge on there. So anyway, I'll link to this story here about Apple. I'm glad that they do some of those things. And the other bonus quickly that you did link to, I love this. I'm not the biggest fan of musicals. I've never have been, but my wife is. And I had told her about Schmigadoon. Am I saying that right? I told her about Schmigadoon.
It's a funny show.
And I think we're going to have to watch it now because you linked to it. And I know it's going to be good.
It's a clever show on Apple TV Plus. It's there's only 6 episodes to it, and the premise is silly, but the premise is just an excuse for them to do a send-up of all the classical musicals. They're not doing send-ups of Hamilton or anything like that. They're doing the old the Oklahoma, the old style, 40s, 50s, 60s musicals. And so if you do like musicals, and perhaps that doesn't include you, Brett, but if you do enjoy musicals, there's funny, and it's really funny. And the thing that I linked to today that I thought was fun is many of the times you listen to a song, like sometimes you hear them doing a song and it's like, okay, this is clearly a send up of that Music Man song, T with the capital, there's Trouble in River City. Like I know the one that they're doing a joke on, but other times
76 trombones. I know that one. Music Man.
Sometimes they would have one that they would have a song and it's like, I know that this seems familiar to me, but I wonder what the influence was for this song. And so this article that I linked from Vanity Fair, they'll tell you here were the likely influences for this song.
Oh, neat.
And it's fun. So you're like,
so it's a little bit of a spoiler alert here, but it's neat.
Yeah,
I like this.
You don't want to read the Vanity Fair article until after you've watched the show.
After. Okay, good. So I'll stop showing it. But I'm so glad you did that because that would just drive me bonkers. If I listen to it, I'm like, I know that song. Where did it come from? Yeah. So I can go to this Vanity Fair and you link to that. Good. Okay, so that's Schmigadoon.
Schmigadoon. That's a funny one.
All right. So in the know, my tip for today is something that we've all known about for a long time, probably, is the app Shazam. Now, it's not just the app, although everybody, again, knows about Shazam, but it was actually about 3 or 4 years ago, Apple acquired Shazam, and I loved that. I was like, okay, what are they going to do? I wish Apple had done a little bit more with it, or maybe they are, but what I loved about it is that when I say, hey, she who shall not be named, I can say, what song is this? In fact, we were traveling back and we were at a sub shop, and while we were waiting for the sandwich, they were playing a song over the speakers, and I'm like, man, I love that. It was like a 40s big band song, and I'm like, what is that song? And in the past, I'd have to listen intently and try to guess what it is. Well, now that I have Shazam, I'm able then to just say, hey, what song is this? But when I say that, it works nicely, but sometimes it takes a while for Siri to respond to me. And then by that time, the music may not be as loud as it was, or somebody starts talking or something like that. So I love this little tip that I found. You can access the Shazam app in several different ways. You can actually go in and find the app and open it and tap the little Shazam, button there to have it to listen. That's one way. To me, again, that takes a little bit too much time. You can do the Siri protocol, but again, as I just said, I don't like that it takes that long. But I found this little tip that I love. You can actually add Shazam in the control center now, and I love that.
Yeah, works great.
I did not. I wish you'd have told me about this. I love this. So you just go into your settings inside your iPhone, or you can do it on your iPad as well. You go to settings, and then you go to the control center, and then inside there, you can say what little buttons do you want to add to your control center. And one of them is called music recognition. It doesn't say Shazam. It says music recognition because it is Shazam, because Apple owns Shazam. But then it adds a little Shazam button to your control center. So now when I want to realize what a song is, I can just open my phone and quickly tap the control center and have Shazam listen. I probably do a Shazam at least once or twice a day because I love listening to music, and I can never remember what it is sometimes. Somebody's playing it somewhere. So I use this constantly. So if you don't have Shazam, then it's absolutely worth having. And then there's different ways you can pull it up. My favorite right now is the control center.
I often use it when I'm watching like a TV show or sometimes a movie, because sometimes a good show will actually have some great music in it, right? And you're like, oh, wow, that's a good song. I might want to listen. And they'll often just have a little bit of it. And so you want to listen more or maybe see other things from that artist. And so I pull out my iPhone and just swipe down from the top right to bring up Control Center. And I tap on the Shazam button, and it within just a second or two, it says, oh, this is the such and such song by so-and-so. And it gives me a tap thing that I could open it up in Apple Music and listen to it. What impresses me, and I'm sure you've seen this too, Brett, is that, you were talking about doing it in a sub shop where there's all this other noise around you and stuff like that. Yeah. I often will do it when I'm listening to a TV show and actors are talking over the song, and somehow Shazam hears through that and still understands the underlying song. And I have learned so many new songs, but also new artists just by helping to with Shazam. So I love this tip. It's a great one.
I just got to tell you quickly. I think we were watching Ted Lasso 2 or 3 weeks ago, and there was a song that came on, and I'm like, I knew the name of the song. It was an old standard, Since I Fell for You, but I'm like, who is singing that? And sure enough, Jeff, I did a Shazam, and it's an old, one of the first Bonnie Raitt albums. I think that was Ted Lasso. I loved that album. I just didn't remember that song was on there. So anyway, just to kind of underscore that, it was just brilliant to be able to do that. And by the way, quickly, Shazam will integrate with either Apple Music or, in my case, I use Spotify. Sure. So once you find the song, you can say, oh, I want to add that, and it'll open in Apple Music or in Spotify. Okay, I could keep talking about Shazam.
Great tip.
I want to know your tip.
Okay, so my tip is a follow-up on the conversation that we had about Wi-Fi before, which is Apple has a technology that is called Apple has HomeKit, which is, for, controlling your home and stuff like that. But they have something that's, you can secure your router with HomeKit. So in order to describe this feature, let me give an example, a very real world example of why you'd want to use it. And I don't know that we've talked about this in the podcast before, but years ago, there was a security issue where some bad guys were trying to break into a casino, which of course, casinos are going to be very, very well protected. And what they had done is, you have it on the screen right now.
Here it is. Yeah,
here it is. There was a single fish tank in a casino that had this little automated thing that it could sense the temperature and adjust it accordingly to keep the fish alive, right? But that little sensor that I'm sure costs like $5 inside of the aquarium would communicate with the manufacturer of that. And the thing is, it wasn't a very good security thing, but anyway, the bad guys were able to hack into the fish tank. And then once they were in the fish tank, they were then able to get onto the network of the casino. And then once you're in the network, you could do anything. So think about your own home. Your own home is not a casino, and you may not have a connected fish tank, but we're having more and more of these connected items in our home. You have something that controls lights. You've got, the Philips Hue, you've got the Lutron,
Yes.
you've got the this, you've got the that, and all of these things. And some of them are from big name companies, but sometimes you might buy something that's just cheap. Maybe it's just a silly thing, and from like a small name company, and it could be vulnerable to attack from a hacker, either by them directly getting into it or getting through the website to it. What you wouldn't want is for that one device to be opening up the doors to your entire house and all of the things in your house. But right now, that's what happens. I mean, if a hacker got into one of your devices, they could then get into your whole network and do all sorts of havoc. So what Apple came up with very cleverly through HomeKit is when you have a router that uses the HomeKit secure method, you can have different settings. All you do in your router. So for me with my eero, for example, I just go in my eero and I say, turn on HomeKit secure. And that's all I do. It's just a simple switch. Once I've done that, then in the home app on my iPhone, I will actually see a list. And you can see example there, I think on the screen I showed you before, it will show you each of the devices that's on your network. And by default, they're set to auto, which means that you're showing it right here. So for example, they know what the devices are. If you have a item that's made by company XYZ, it will say, look, I'm going to let this item go to the internet, but only to talk to XYZ, not other websites, because if it's talking to another website, that's probably a hacker's website. And then also, I know Apple knows, this device, maybe this device should be able to talk to X over here, but this device has no business in the world talking to Y and Z in your home. And so it will block them. It's like a firewall. It blocks them from doing so. And you can adjust the settings. The auto one is perfect for me. There, you can actually make it more secure by saying that I don't want this device to even access the internet, which may have a problem because you might not be able to control it remotely. So that, that's very secure, but it may take away some functionality. Or you can, choose a different setting. But it's great because it's a simple way to add security that you may never have even thought about in your own home just by flipping a switch. Now, in order to do this, you have to have a router that works with HomeKit security. And the newer ones do. Eero does, for example. But this really goes back to what we were talking about a couple of minutes ago, which is you want to have a new router. You don't want to be using a router that's 10 years old that hasn't been updated with the latest security fixes and everything else. So that's my tip, is that if you have a router that works with HomeKit, go ahead and turn on that HomeKit security. It's not going to limit you in any way. All it's going to do is make it more secure
protection
and give you more protection against the bad guys. So
I am
and
so
that way your fish
this.
can be secure in their fish tank.
And fortunately, I don't have any fish, but I am definitely going to set this up, Jeff. Thank you. I guess, I hadn't done a lot of HomeKit. I don't have a lot of connected light bulbs and stuff like that. But a couple of things are starting to dribble in, where I can connect. Like we've got the Wi-Fi. It's a scale, right, for the bathroom. Anyway, things just kind of start dribbling in, right? And it's I didn't even realize you could do this.
The scale is a good example because that's something somebody, when they're buying a Wi-Fi enabled scale, you can it's very reasonable to say, I'm just going to get the cheapest one that's on Amazon, right? But the cheapest one on Amazon is probably coming from a company that doesn't really care about security that much, or, has only the minimal and it's the easiest for a hacker to get into. And, the last thing that you need is to learn that the reason that your computer got hacked was because of your scale. I mean, nobody wants to be in that position. So take advantage of this feature if you have it. That's my tip.
The other thing is also a thermostat. Like we have a not a Nest, the other one, Ecobee. Thank you. But which is great because when we were on vacation, we could check in and we make sure the house was cool when we got back. But anyway, it's just like I said, things will start dribbling in. So this is an excellent tip. Thanks for sharing that. Good. I'll make sure we have a link for everybody to set that up as well. All right, Jeff. Thanks as always for joining, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week. Bye-bye.